Right, let's come to you for questions. So if you have a question, put your hand up and I'll come to you. And while you're thinking through that, I've got a few questions here to pose to panelists. The issue Stuart and colleagues talked about is artificial intelligence, robotics, new way of providing that support to innovation. How much do you see future innovation based and reliant on AI and robotics and so forth?
I'll start at this end. Quite a lot of the challenger energy companies we're working with aren't really energy companies, they're digital companies. They're underpinned by massive databases, massive AI systems, and that's allowing them to do things differently, because the energy system broadly is just getting increasingly complex with things like time of use tariff. You know, that's a simple example. Once you go to demand side response, grid services, it all gets very, very complex, and that's really, you know, it's all going to be underpinned by digital as far as we can see.
This way, anybody, Anthony, Stuart?
No, I think, as I mentioned, it's kind of where the industry is going. It's robots are seen as a kind of future and that data-driven approach. So I think where we can take away the risk and repetitive nature of some of the tasks involved with robots, it's been seen as the way forward.
And Stuart, just from catapult thinking, how would you build that into future thinking of the type of innovation that would be led through either robotic, AI, or is it still human element in innovation?
So one of the things that we do, again in partnership with industry, is to develop technology roadmaps for offshore wind, where we take a 20-year forward view and we look at what some of the challenges industry faces are and how those challenges can be met. So we look at things like current technology readiness level, the time that might be required to develop the commercial readiness, and who needs to be involved. So there are some issues that, you know, the catapult doesn't need to be involved in. I don't mind saying that. There are things that industry will very well kind of serve itself in terms of internalising R&D. But there are then those projects where I think, particularly if we look at data and AI and machine learning, where the benefits can be realised much more quickly if a collaborative industry approach is taken. And that's because obviously the bigger the data sets you're able to develop and kind of manipulate and learn from, the quicker the learning. And I think as well, the more that industry can be encouraged to share data with innovators, the quicker some of those solutions are then likely to come online, because with the best will in the world, no disrespect to any big OEM, but they're not going to have all the solutions. And you know, micro SMEs and smaller companies like Pete's have exceptionally good ideas, but very often the challenge is obtaining the data and the access to be able to develop them. So again, a lot of the work that we do is about identifying the kind of the SME push and trying to match that with an industry pull in a constructive way. And I guess, you know, obtaining data for the AI and machine learning challenges is one way that we can help, because we've delivered a lot of projects where we've been able to anonymize data and aggregate data, which then gives innovators a useful data set to be able to work with without the OEM having to give too much away.
Okay, any more questions from the floor? I can see some hands coming up now. Okay, you're there. Please introduce yourself, who you are, and then the question, please.
Ian Manley from Manchester Metropolitan University. I just wondered, what do you see as the biggest barriers to innovation, you know, across all sectors?
What's going to pick that up? Barriers to innovation.
Money.
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, John is absolutely right, but money and resources is a factor. And I mentioned to you that the catapult, I believe rightly so, is encouraged to sort of leverage around a third of its revenues from other sources. That can be industry, or it can also be devolved and regional governments. And I think if we bring this back to the kind of thinking about things in the context of the Northern Powerhouse, one of the advantages elsewhere, I look at Scotland, where many of my colleagues are based, is that they've got Scottish government funding that can be leveraged very often to support the Innovate UK investment and deliver innovation. And I think, you know, Scottish SMEs probably do quite well as a result of that. And there are examples, of course, in the Northern Powerhouse of devolved, combined city regions. And again, I think they're probably well placed to go more quickly with regional decisions being taken. A challenge, I would say, across the Northern Powerhouse is what does the Northern Powerhouse do to support regions like this, where there is no devolved, government deal and the spending that comes with it, and that's a real challenge because typically they're going to be, arguably the more left behind areas anyway, the non kind of urban metropolitan areas. So I think resource, you're right, John, is a challenge.
So I think towards the end, I was going to ask you one big issue we need to take back to it. Maybe Stuart, that's one we need to pick up. And how do you make sure that the whole of the region is supported, particularly areas where there isn't that framework? Yeah, sorry, yourself, Pete.
I'd like to pick on that from a purely personal perspective. So I left as site manager of a wind farm to start up an SME. I've got a list of 5 different innovations that I'd like to do for the industry. But the truth is, the one I'm doing, it's a £200,000 project. We've got to find 30% of that. I haven't got that times 5 times to develop the 5 innovations, so they're just sat in a folder on my computer. So that's my personal example.
Okay, there you are, Andy.
I mean, I'm just sort of pondering because money is the obvious answer. I mean, I do think to some extent it is the answer, but I also do wonder about my experience of innovation in the Humber. You get quite far quite quick from an idea. You can get people around the table. You can get things moving. I think what we lack is the skills base and the commercialisation of innovation. And whether we see that in some universities or not, but I suspect there are tens of thousands of ideas kicking out there in various places that with the right commercial expertise could get to market, because the investment market of most infrastructure funds now, as long as it's even less than a double-digit return, some funds will talk to you now about those sort of ideas. But it is a skill, and it's a limited skill in supply. I think if we're talking about SMEs and we're talking about how you support businesses, that's one thing that I think we really need to help people with is how do you actually commercialise an idea.
But is there a danger, though, Andy, that quite often the innovators are those people who are not entrepreneurs, and therefore they will be innovating for the sake of innovating, but don't have the entrepreneurship skill to move it into commercialisation?
I think that's kind of it, is that we've seen it in the tech community here quite significantly. Lots and lots of tech businesses, they start up because they're a software developer, they've got a great idea, no idea about how you make a business, about how you do sales or business development, and that's the bit for me that's the question of what is the barrier. I do think that is one of the big barriers I think that we face is how do you help the commercial angle.
Well, you've been nodding your head. Do you want to?
I totally agree with that. I think the thing is as innovators, the idea of making something shiny that you can play with and get out into the real world is very exciting. There's a lot of boring stuff about innovation, about Lambert agreements, and paperwork, and non-disclosure agreements, and and it's all very exciting and especially in collaborative R&D, it's all very exciting when we're all around the table going, oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, and then it becomes a good idea and nobody did the paperwork, and it's knives at dawn. So we do need that that kind of infrastructure to support that dull end of innovation. To any lawyers in the room, it's not that dull, but we need that. I like the shiny stuff and I keep away from the dull stuff, but it's part of the big picture.
Okay, thank you. We've got one more question around here. Somebody put their hand up for you. Dave.
Thank you. I'm Steve Underwood from HESA. I'm just interested in finding out a little bit where the wind industry is with tech right now, for instance with robotics. Where is the industry globally with, say, teaching robots to do remote repair schemes?
Anthony, you going to go there?
From my own personal experience, it's very much new at the moment. Obviously, inspections of components are done by a drone and a camera. That's kind of what's globally used now. But obviously, what we're looking for is the next level of, right, we need robots that can actually physically attach to the turbine and replace items, potentially repair, as well as inspection. So it's kind of looking for a full suite of items that can be done by robot. So that it's, I'd say the industry wants it, wants that innovation to go to the robotic side, but it's very limited task at the moment that robots are deployed for.
Not yet got back into the design phase either.
Not really, no. It's the consideration. So I think at the moment, obviously, we've had robotic challenges, as I mentioned. That's going out to industry, established businesses, small, medium enterprises, and saying, look, here's our idea. This is what we would like to cover. Is there a solution you have that can hit these points? So I think at the moment it's very much what's out there, and any idea is an idea that's to be considered.
Edinburgh University 2 years ago.
Yeah, just get the mic to pick it up.
I just
loud enough. No, I was only pointing out that Edinburgh University won a bid for £36 million 2 years ago to develop offshore robotics because we're behind in it. And the reason they wanted to accelerate, our country needs to accelerate robotics. So that's the only point.
I think the point you made as a follow-up is key, that the way wind turbines are designed ergonomically, personally, I'm a huge skeptic. I don't believe in putting robots in turbines that have got ladders, platforms. They're designed for humans to access. So my take on the industry is use data, predictive maintenance, AI to reduce the maintenance requirement rather than design multi-million-pound robots to try and get ladders designed for humans. So I think the answer is to redesign the turbine for robotics to be introduced. In the same way, if you look back at electrifying factories that were steam driven off a central shaft, you need to redesign the workplace to adapt to the new technology, and that's where we are right with robots.
Can I just ask a question about, in terms of the technology we already have, how much of this technology is exportable internationally? Because one of the challenges of the North is we have a lot of good things here, but probably we don't export enough. Any thoughts on those? Louise?
Well, a lot of countries are coming to this region particularly. I mean, we've had over 30 inward missions, and I think that is something that we need to just not give our knowledge away for free, and that we need to try and commercialise that as well. I personally spent a week in Rhode Island. They're desperate to see how we did that, and that's not just in how we collaborated, but also on innovation, and they're about to take off there. And we've said to them, why would you reinvent the wheel? Why redo the research? Why not join us? And that's, I think, something we need to think about. We need to make our offer good so that they come spend their money here.
And just a final one from me. In terms of the different parts of the North in that collaboration, I can see some of the maps that were put in is obviously national collaboration happening. How much opportunities are there for the North as a region to collaborate better?
Well, I think one of the great things about Aura has been the way that government has structured the pulling down of funding has been to force organisations to work together. And I think initially there was a need to force, but I think we've seen incredible benefits from collaborating with a number of universities across the north, actually. So Newcastle, Sheffield, Durham, Strathclyde. And I think we've all seen how beneficial. I mean, the University of Hull, it's been good for the University of Hull. And by the way, it's one of the universities that has the highest number of local students, which is good for the region because we're going to have a skills gap and we need those people and they're loyal. And I think it's been great for us because we even want to see a Centre for Doctoral Training, which I don't come from academia, but it's a really big deal. And we've done really well for this region. So it's great. It should happen. It can't happen in isolation. Yes, Warwick may be great at storage, but that's connected to other things as well. So yes, more.
Stuart?
Yeah, it certainly does happen, but there's potential to do an awful lot more. And I guess as a case in point, so we're working very closely with colleagues over at the Liverpool City region and other partners involved in the cluster there. To support that process, but I'm always mindful that there's huge potential, and typically what tends to happen, I think, is the focus for offshore wind innovation tends to be in places that are seen as, perhaps maritime or offshore wind clusters. Now, if we're talking about some of the things we're talking about, AI, robotics, the businesses of the future in offshore wind could be in places like Manchester and Leeds and elsewhere, and yet it would seem quite counterintuitive if I contacted the ED team in Manchester and said I wanted to have a conversation about offshore wind. That could be kind of difficult, long path towards fruition of any development there. And again, another challenge is for the Northern Powerhouse to perhaps be thinking about how we maximise opportunities across industries, across sectors.
Well, that actually gives me a good segue to the final question I'm going to put to all of you. It's the one question really. From this conference, we want to take a message back to NP11. So if I challenged all of you and say, what's the one point you would want us to take back to NP11 after this, in relation to innovation back to the NP11?
Just think about how we're going to strategically make investment decisions in innovation across the Northern Powerhouse. Okay, Pete?
I'm going to cheat 2 points. One thing that didn't come up earlier was, I believe, I don't know the number exactly, but 80 or 90% of all angel investment in new startups is in the southeast. So there's a structural problem in the country. We spoke a lot about grant funding, but actually other routes of funding aren't open to companies in the north. The structural thing I would change is to put the customers of technology into the decision making of where investment goes in a better way. These knowledge transfer network innovation exchanges are good, but I think that model for me as an SME is ideal because I get to speak to the end user much earlier.
I think it's been touched on with the commercialisation, but then it's also the engagement of the large scale companies. Obviously, you work for GE, a global company, it's that engagement. I think it started from a GE renewable point of view. Obviously, it's we're doing our first kind of works with the knowledge transfer in Innovate UK. But I think, until we started digging into it, you don't realise what's available. So it's kind of getting that connection and making sure companies are aware of, look, you could go for this, you can do this.
So I think that it is the right time and the right place, but now we've got to make sure that we get the right people involved. And I think that we need to understand what collaboration means better and do it better so that we all benefit.
Yeah, I think my ask is, when you look at the theme of this conference, energy and clean growth, you look at what may or may not happen around Brexit. The UK economy is critical, and I think we've got to start to shift on this agenda, less competition and more collaboration. And we can compete on the forecourts, that's fine, but in the background of that, developing the innovation and the projects, we've got to do this together. I know colleagues in government have raised that with in the past. It's a different mindset, and I think this is such a big challenge. We will not achieve these sort of carbon ambition targets without doing that, in my opinion.
When I was first a researcher, I used to work in BIM, and I used to program code objects, and there used to be a pot of cash from the Department of Environment, Transport and Regions called Partners in Innovation. And it's a blind spot. They got rid of it, but it allowed multiple companies to work together on a shared industry problem, usually before things were quite ready for market. And somebody should bring that back.
Okay, it's some sort of funding that enables those sort of
Yeah. So it was multiple companies in the same sector working on a shared problem. So if you're thinking like 1900 here, the BIM was not coming to the market, and they needed some examples of it. They wanted to understand what it meant for their industry, and a group of construction companies in different sectors, but also some in the same sectors, got together and said, let's build some demonstrators and develop some shared understanding. That kind of pre-market exploration that a group of companies can do together around something like, is it standards, or is there something going on in the supply chain? What are the critical factors within the system? Especially when you're dealing with a complex system like innovation, particularly energy. That kind of space for a group of people to sort of share out an early shared problem is quite useful.
Good, some interesting ideas here which we can put forward to the NP11. Can you give our panel a round of applause?